At 9:18 on a Wednesday morning, an adoption caseworker asked me to confirm that my husband and I had been living separately since June 2022. I told her we had eaten breakfast together 40 minutes earlier. She went quiet, then said, "Mrs. Caldwell, I need to pause this call." Reed signed a release allowing us to verify his marital status, but the prospective household on this file is Reed Caldwell and Elise Morgan. I had never heard the name Elise Morgan. The caseworker, Nia Benton, did not tell me anything about a child, because there was no child assigned and I was not an applicant. She explained only what directly involved me. Reed had identified me as his legal spouse, stated that we maintained separate residences, and provided my cell number for a required status interview before a preliminary home study could be scheduled. Nia asked whether a divorce or legal separation case existed. I said no. She said North Star Family Services would freeze the file until the applicants corrected the discrepancy, and she would email me a copy of the contact authorization Reed had signed. Before we hung up, I asked one question. When you say prospective household, do you mean they are applying together? Nia chose her words carefully. That is how they presented their plan to us. My name is Dana Caldwell. I was 43 and managed 2 branches of the Milwaukee Public Library system. Reed was 45 and sold commercial lighting systems to hospitals and office developers across Wisconsin and Iowa. We had been married 17 years, owned a brick bungalow in Wauwatosa, and had no children. That last fact was not a wound we avoided discussing. Before we married, we had talked about parenthood until the conversation became boring in the healthy way important decisions sometimes do. I had never felt a strong need to become a mother. Reed said he liked children but did not want his life organized around raising them. We checked the decision again in our early 30s, and once more when his sister had twins. Each time, he said, "I like being the uncle who can go home." I had believed that sentence belonged to both of us. Our marriage had not been empty around that choice. We traveled, helped with the twins, cared for our parents, and built careers that required odd hours without keeping score. 5 years earlier, when a friend asked whether we regretted not becoming parents, Reed had answered before I could, "No. We chose the life that fits us." I remembered being grateful that he said us. Nothing in the years after suggested he wanted the question reopened, much less answered inside another household. I called Reed from my office and asked who Elise Morgan was. He was supposed to be in Des Moines presenting a lighting retrofit to a hospital group. Behind him I heard a turn signal and road noise. "Why are you asking me that?" he said. I repeated North Star Family Services and the words prospective household. The road noise stopped. "Dana, it's not what that sounds like." "Then tell me what it is." "Elise is a friend from the nonprofit project in Madison. She asked me to help with an adoption application because single applicants have a harder time." It was a bad explanation delivered too quickly. "The caseworker said you were a prospective parent." She misunderstood the file. "She read your signed release." Reed said he was pulling over and would call me back. I told him not to call back until he could explain why he had listed us as living separately for nearly 4 years. He said, "I never said 4 years." I looked at the date I had written on a circulation slip. June 2022. He breathed out. "I can fix this. You can correct a file. You cannot make this call not happen." Nia's email arrived 8 minutes later. It contained no application, private family profile, or information about any prospective child. It included Reed's one-page authorization for North Star to contact me, a checklist of questions directed to a non-applying legal spouse, and a cover note confirming that the file would not proceed until marital and residential status was resolved. The checklist asked whether I knew Reed intended to join another household, whether our finances had been separated, and whether I objected to the proposed plan. My truthful answers were no, no, and yes. Reed's signature was dated 7 months earlier. The address under proposed residence belonged to a condominium on Maple Grove Avenue in Madison. I did not drive there. I did not search for Elise on social media. I saved the documents to a folder in my personal account and forwarded them to our home printer because I wanted paper in front of me when Reed returned. Then I did 2 things I had a right to do. I checked the public Wisconsin court index for our names and confirmed there was no divorce or separation filing. I also opened our joint credit card statements. 9 months earlier, a charge for $2,750 from North Star Family Services appeared on the card Reed used for business travel. He had labeled it LC certification in the budgeting app. When I asked about it at the time, he said his company required a lighting controls credential before he could bid on hospital work. The initials had been convenient. The payment was not hidden in a secret account. It had passed through our monthly budget meeting while I sat across from him and accepted a false label. 3 other calendar entries now changed shape. Safety Course Madison had occupied 2 Saturdays in February. Home Assessment Prep was blocked on a Friday when Reed said he was reviewing a senior living project. EM References sat at 6 p.m. on a Sunday, disguised by the same initials as an energy management client. The entries were in a shared calendar because Reed relied on me not to ask what professional shorthand meant. The 2 Saturday courses matched weekends when I had covered an extra library shift so he could complete what he called mandatory safety training. I had packed him sandwiches for one of them. I stopped after those 3. Opening his private devices would not make the records more lawful or the betrayal more real. At noon I left the library and called my older sister, Marisol, from the parking garage. I told her an agency believed my husband was preparing to adopt with another woman. She said, "Do you want me to come over?" I said not yet. I wanted Reed to walk into the version of our home he had declared separate and explain it without an audience. He arrived at 3:40, 5 hours earlier than his itinerary showed. I did not ask where he had turned around. I had placed the signed authorization, the North Star charge, and a printout of the 3 calendar entries on the dining table. Reed looked at them and remained standing. "There is no child," he said. "I know. Nia protected that boundary better than you protected any of ours." He flinched. This was preliminary. Elise wants to adopt. She needed someone who could show stability. "Were you applying to be a parent?" I was helping her see whether the household would qualify. "As what?" He pulled out a chair but did not sit. "As a future co-parent, maybe." Nothing was final. I asked whether he was in a relationship with Elise. He said the word complicated, then stopped because both of us heard how useless it was. "Yes," he said. "For how long?" 2 years. "Physical?" "Yes." I asked whether he had ever brought her into our house, whether he had used joint money beyond the fee, whether any child had met him as a prospective father, and whether I needed medical testing. He said no, only that charge, no, and yes. The 4th answer emptied the room of every remaining excuse. I told him to pack clothes for a week and stay in a hotel. Reed said we should not make permanent decisions during the worst hour of our marriage. I said the worst hour had lasted long enough for him to complete 7 months of paperwork. He put both hands on the chair back. I didn't know if I actually wanted this until the process started. "So you tested a second family while keeping the first one operational. That's not fair." I pointed to the line that said separate residences since June 2022. "Then give me a fair description of that." He could not. As he packed, North Star sent a second automated notice to the address I had given Nia for status updates. The subject line read PRA Home Study Interview, Scheduling Hold. The body confirmed that Reed Caldwell and Elise Morgan had requested an interview for the following Thursday. The application was not an old favor, a reference, or an abandoned question. Until Nia called me, it had been moving forward. Reed stayed at an airport hotel that night and moved to a furnished apartment 3 days later. I scheduled medical testing, changed passwords on my individual accounts, documented balances, and met with a family law attorney named Cynthia Park. Cynthia told me that a false statement in an adoption file was for the agency to evaluate, not for me to prosecute from the kitchen table. I should answer questions about my own residence accurately, preserve records already available to me, and avoid draining accounts or contacting Reed's employer. The North Star fee had been paid from a joint card, but that did not turn every part of the application into my property. I sent Nia a concise written statement. Reed and I had lived together continuously at the Wauwatosa address, no divorce or legal separation had been filed, and I had never consented to be described as a non-resident spouse. Nia acknowledged receipt and said the file remained on hold. She disclosed nothing else. Reed emailed an apology that was 11 paragraphs long and answered almost none of my questions. He said he had evolved on parenthood, feared hurting me, and became close to Elise while advising her nonprofit on an office lighting grant. He described the adoption paperwork as a way to understand whether a different life was possible, not a commitment to leave our marriage. That distinction made the betrayal worse. He had treated our marriage as the life he would keep if the other one failed inspection. 5 days after the call, a letter arrived at the library reception desk in an envelope marked personal. It was from Elise Morgan. She wrote that Reed had told her I knew about their relationship and that our marriage had functionally ended in 2022. According to him, we remained in the same house because mortgage rates made a sale foolish, because I needed time to accept the end, and because we had agreed not to announce anything until his mother recovered from heart surgery. His mother had never had heart surgery. Elise said she knew we were still legally married. She did not know we shared a bedroom, filed joint tax returns, took an anniversary trip the previous fall, or had never discussed separation. The anniversary trip had been 4 days in Door County. Reed booked the room, ordered a small cake from the hotel, and gave me a silver watch engraved with the date we met. Elise said he described the trip as a gentle farewell I had requested before we announced the separation. He called her from the hotel lobby each morning while I was upstairs showering. One event had served opposite meanings in 2 lives, renewal to me, closure to her, delay to him. She also said she would answer bounded factual questions because Reed had used my supposed consent as evidence that he was emotionally ready to parent. I showed Cynthia the letter before responding. She advised me to meet only if I believed facts about health, money, or the timeline would change my decisions. I wrote 4 questions on an index card: when the relationship began, what Reed had said about our marriage, what money or property they shared, and whether the application had moved beyond preparation. I told Elise in advance that I would not ask for the identity, history, or circumstances of any child considered by the agency. She replied that there was no such information to share. That exchange gave the meeting a boundary neither of us could pretend not to understand. Marisol sat at another table when Elise and I met in a hotel lobby near the interstate. Elise was 39, worked as a grant writer for an arts education nonprofit, and looked less like a rival than a person who had not slept. She began by saying, "I knew he was married, so I'm not going to call myself innocent." She had met Reed 6 years earlier during a renovation project. Their friendship became an emotional relationship in 2021 and physical in January 2022, weeks before the separation date he later invented. When she challenged him about me, he said we had chosen a private, cooperative ending and that I did not want a legal process until the housing market improved. "Why did you believe him?" I asked. "Because he never hid your existence," she said. "He hid your reality." Reed took calls from me in front of her. He visited our house openly. He referred to me as Dana, not an alias. Every visible fact could fit a separation if Elise accepted the explanation attached to it. Over time she accepted less and asked more. Reed's answers became milestones: after his mother's recovery, after our anniversary trip that he called a farewell, after the adoption orientation, after the preliminary review. Elise had wanted to adopt for years. She attended an information session alone, and Reed initially came as support. Then he enrolled in required education sessions, completed background check forms, participated in household budgeting, and helped convert her home office into a room that could eventually meet agency standards. He installed outlet covers, anchored a bookcase, replaced a balcony latch, and photographed smoke and carbon monoxide detectors for the readiness checklist. Those were not dramatic purchases, but they showed attention repeated over months. At our house, he had postponed replacing a loose stair rail twice because he said spring sales travel left him no time. No child had visited the condo or been promised to them. They had not reached matching or approval. Elise was careful about that, and I was grateful. She opened a binder that belonged to her and showed me only pages she had authored or jointly signed. A training certificate carried both names. A home safety checklist listed Reed as prospective co-parent. A draft family profile described them as a committed couple preparing to formalize their household after the conclusion of Reed's cooperative separation. Then Elise showed me the paragraph that changed the story. It said Reed's legal spouse had chosen a child-free life, understood that his desire to parent had grown, and supported him in pursuing that calling with someone else. Did he say I wrote this? I asked. He said you approved the wording. I had not known there was wording to approve. For 17 years, our decision not to have children had been mutual. Reed had not merely changed his mind. He had reassigned the old decision to me alone, then invented my blessing so he could present his secrecy as mature cooperation. I read the paragraph again and noticed it praised my generosity. The word was worse than blame. It turned my absence from the decision into a moral contribution and made Reed's deception look respectful. If the file had continued, strangers evaluating his readiness would have understood me as the woman who knowingly stepped aside. The hidden life depended not only on removing me from the household, but on making me endorse my removal. I asked Elise when Reed planned to file for divorce. She looked down at the binder. After the readiness review. Why after? He said he couldn't dismantle one life until he knew the agency would consider us. The central question shifted in that moment. I had thought Reed was avoiding divorce because he lacked courage. He had delayed it as risk management. If the agency considered their age, relationship duration, or unresolved marriage too unstable, he intended to return fully to me without ever admitting that our future had been tested against another application. Elise said she had begun to suspect this when he resisted filing even after their orientation. She kept going because she was 39 and afraid another delay would close a door she had worked years to open. I understood why she had kept accepting delays. Understanding did not excuse her choice to stay. What do you want from me? I asked. Nothing, she said. The application should stop. I told Nia I won't proceed on a false household statement. I needed you to know that the permission he quoted did not come from anything I saw. She gave me copies of the jointly signed training certificate, the profile paragraph, and a budget showing Reed's contributions. I declined photographs and private messages. Before leaving, I asked whether Reed had spent nights at her condo. She said most Thursdays and one weekend a month since 2022, usually when I believed he was visiting hospital projects. He kept a suitcase in her garage cabinet and had a key. I asked about money. Elise understood that Reed had paid the agency fee, several course costs, and about $4,200 toward furniture and repairs. She believed the fee came from a professional education account and the rest from his personal account. She had never entered our home and had met none of our relatives. Reed had built the second future with unusually few accomplices. He needed only 2 women to trust 2 different versions of the same delay. When I returned to Marisol's table, she asked whether I had learned enough. I said yes. The affair was 4 years, not 2. The application was active, not exploratory. No child had been placed, but the plan to parent was real, and Reed had made me the obstacle in a story I had never heard. The remaining unknown was no longer whether he planned to leave. It was whether he would ever have told me if North Star had said no. I met Reed the next evening at our house with Marisol in the den and both of our attorneys aware of the meeting. I did not place Elisa's entire binder on the table. I used 3 pages, the training certificate, the paragraph claiming my support, and the budget. Reed stared at the paragraph longer than the others. She wasn't supposed to show you that, he said. Is it true? It was how I understood things. You understood that I gave you permission to build a family with Elise. You were always clear that you didn't want children. So were you. Reed paced to the kitchen and back. He said his feelings changed after his sister's twins grew older and started asking him to coach their soccer team. He began to imagine school pickups, weekend breakfasts, and being responsible for someone beyond himself. When he raised the subject indirectly, he claimed I laughed and said we were too old to start over. I remembered the conversation. We had been at his sister's house after a loud birthday party. Reed said, "Can you imagine doing this every weekend?" I said, "Absolutely not, because the twins were spraying a garden hose through an open patio door." He had turned a joke about chaos into a final refusal I did not know he was requesting. "Why didn't you ask me plainly?" I said. "Because if you said no, I would have to choose." "You chose. You just kept the result private." He sat down and rubbed the inside of his wedding ring with his thumb. I asked whether he intended to stay if North Star rejected the household. Reed did not answer until I repeated the question. "I didn't have a fixed plan." "Would you have told me?" "Eventually." "Before or after you decided I was still the safer option?" He said I was making him sound calculating when he had been terrified. I believed the fear. I did not accept it as the opposite of calculation. Fear had made him preserve every exit, my income, our house, Elisa's condo, the application, and a version of me who had supposedly consented. I asked about sexual health, money, access to our home, and whether he had signed my name anywhere. He confirmed the relationship remained physical until the caseworker called. Elise had never entered our home. He had not signed my name, changed beneficiaries, opened joint debt, or represented me as a reference. He had used $2,750 from the joint card and roughly $5,400 from his personal account for classes, household preparation, travel, and repairs. Cynthia later traced the available records and found no secret property or additional loans. Nothing in the review suggested another crime, and I stopped looking for one. Reed had spent marital money, lied about travel, created a false residential history, and designed parenthood around my invented approval. I asked Cynthia whether I needed to preserve every hotel charge and calendar entry. She said we would keep what affected finances and chronology, but I did not have to become the permanent archivist of the affair. That advice gave me permission to stop collecting once the facts could support a decision. The next discovery did not need to be worse than the last one. I asked why he provided my real phone number if he intended the lie to survive. He said North Star required direct spouse verification before the home study. He had expected to tell me the application was a professional background review and asked me to confirm that we often lived apart because of his travel. When Nia called earlier than he expected, he was driving to Madison to rehearse that explanation with Elise. That was why he had never reached Des Moines. The detail was humiliating in its ordinariness. He had not made one reckless clerical error. He had planned to recruit me into the last false statement after I had unknowingly financed the first fee. I told Reed I would not verify a separation that never existed and would not contact the agency beyond accurate answers about myself. What happened to the file was the applicant's responsibility. He said I could phrase the truth without closing every door. I asked which part of our shared breakfast, shared address, and unfiled marriage he wanted softened. He had no answer that did not require me to help manufacture the separation after discovering it. He asked whether I understood that closing it could cost him his chance to become a father. No, I said. Your false application may cost you time. My truthful address is not the injury. Reed cried then. He said he loved me, had loved our life, and hated himself for wanting something our marriage did not contain. I said changing his mind was not betrayal. Giving everyone else a version of my answer was. He asked for counseling. I agreed to 2 discernment sessions only if they were used to decide whether the marriage could continue, not to pressure me into adopting or to convert his affair into a communication problem. The sessions clarified more than they repaired. Reed admitted he had stayed because he wanted proof that life with Elise could become a family before he surrendered the home, reputation, and financial stability he had with me. He also admitted that, if the application failed early, he probably would have ended the affair and called the entire period a crisis he survived privately. In the second session, the counselor asked what he expected me to do if he eventually confessed. Reed said he imagined I would be devastated but would understand that he had spared me years of conflict. I asked how being denied the conflict could count as mercy. He said, I thought I could carry the uncertainty for both of us. The sentence sounded protective until the counselor asked who had authorized him to carry mine. He looked at the floor. The counselor asked what truth I could use to decide whether to reconcile when Reed admitted he would have hidden everything if the application failed. Reed said there was none. I filed for divorce the following week. North Star closed the preliminary file after Elise withdrew and Reed failed to provide consistent marital documentation. Nia's final note to me contained no punishment, accusation, or information about future eligibility. It simply confirmed that no further verification from me was needed. There was no child to remove, no placement to disrupt, and no public blacklist. Reed and Elise were free to make lawful choices later, after their relationship and legal statuses were honest. I was relieved no prospective child had been brought into the deception. The consequences belonged to the adults who made the choices. My marriage ended, and Reed lost the ability to keep two futures active at once. We told our families separately. Marisol already knew. Reed's sister, Tessa, called me after he told her and apologized for the soccer team conversations, as if her twins had caused him to change. I said they had not. Children did not create his deception, they revealed a desire he refused to discuss honestly. Most friends received only a short explanation that Reed had maintained another relationship and we were divorcing. I did not circulate the application pages or let the word adoption become gossip shorthand for the affair. The agency process involved families whose privacy had nothing to do with us, and I would not turn it into social evidence. My parents asked whether I regretted choosing not to have children with him. I could not answer in a way that satisfied them. The decision had been real when we made it. I did not know what I might have said if Reed had returned to it directly at 39 or 40. Perhaps I would have remained certain. Perhaps I would have considered fostering, adoption, or a life built differently. The point was not that he owed me a child or that I owed him parenthood. He owed our marriage the question. During temporary financial negotiations, Reed reimbursed the joint card for the North Star fee from his share of accessible funds. The attorneys treated the rest of his spending as part of the full marital accounting, not as a pile of receipts I could simply collect. He rented an apartment in Madison. I remained in the bungalow while we prepared it for sale. Elise ended their relationship, according to Reed, because she no longer trusted any plan that required someone else to remain uninformed. I did not contact her to confirm it. She had given me the facts I needed and withdrawn from the false application. We did not owe each other friendship. 3 months after filing, Reed asked to retrieve several boxes from the attic. We inventoried them together because temporary orders required notice. One box was missing, a carton of children's books that had belonged to me and Marisol when we were young. I had saved them for nieces, library displays, or no reason beyond attachment. Reed admitted he had taken the box to Elisa's condo for the future room. That small theft affected me differently from the money. He had carried my childhood stories into a home study plan where I existed only as the woman who refused family life. I asked for the books back. A week later, he left the carton with my attorney. On top lay a home safety checklist bearing both their initials. Cynthia returned the checklist to Reed's counsel. The books came home to me. The divorce took 13 months. We sold the bungalow after replacing 2 basement windows and arguing, through counsel, about whether the dining table belonged with the house or with me. The equity and retirement accounts were divided under our agreement in state law. Reed kept his job. I kept mine. No agency announced his lie to the public, and the divorce court did not erase his income because he had betrayed me. Our final medical results were negative. The practical consequences were ordinary enough to feel insulting: appraisal fees, duplicate rent, changed emergency contacts, tax estimates, and a stack of forms asking for the date our household ended. Until the bungalow sold, Reed and I paid the mortgage from the joint account under a temporary agreement and split utilities according to who remained in the house. He collected personal property on scheduled Saturdays while Marisol or a neutral friend was present. There were no shouting matches on the lawn. The ugliest dispute concerned a set of dining chairs his father had refinished and my mother had reupholstered. Both families could claim part of their history. We sold the set with the house and divided the modest value because neither of us could take it without turning furniture into a verdict. The buyers knew only that we were divorcing and wanted a flexible closing date. They did not need the story behind the basement windows or the reason one bedroom closet was already empty. For legal purposes, we chose the date Reed moved to the hotel. He had tried to backdate the truth to June 2022, the actual date fit on one line. Reed apologized in different ways over those months. At first he apologized for the affair. Then for the application. Later he apologized for turning my child-free choice into a fixed defect while treating his changed desire as growth. That apology reached the deepest injury, but understanding did not restore consent. In one of our final conversations, he asked whether I would have considered adoption if he had asked honestly. I told him I still did not know. He looked frustrated, as though uncertainty denied him a clean moral. "I need to understand whether I destroyed this for something we could have had," he said. "You destroyed it because you decided my answer before asking," I replied. "The answer itself is not available anymore. That was not punishment. The question belonged to a marriage that no longer existed." For months, uncertainty about that answer embarrassed me. People understood anger at an affair, they were less comfortable when I said I also grieved a conversation that had never occurred. With a therapist, I separated three things Reed had merged: my original decision not to parent, the possibility that I might have reconsidered, and his right to become a parent after leaving honestly. The first had been mutual. The second was unknowable. The third had always existed. None required an affair or a false home study file. That distinction stopped me from arguing with an imaginary version of myself who had either agreed enthusiastically or refused him forever. I did not have to invent the answer he failed to request. Reed moved to a smaller apartment outside Madison. I bought a 2-bedroom condo near the library's Washington Park branch. The second room became a workroom with a long table for repairing donated books, a task I had always performed badly on the dining table. I did not call it a nursery that never happened or prove my independence by filling it with expensive furniture. It was simply a room I chose after no one else had assigned it a future. During the first month, I used the table for nothing except unopened mail. Then one of our preservation librarians taught me how to mend a torn hinge with Japanese tissue and wheatstarch paste. My first repair dried crooked, and the second held. The work demanded patience without asking me to solve the book's entire history. I began bringing home withdrawn volumes that were worth saving but not urgent enough for the conservation queue. On quiet evenings, I repaired one spine, washed the brush, and stopped. The routine was small, useful, and mine. It did not need to become a new identity built in reaction to Reed. The carton Reed returned stayed closed for several weeks. When I finally opened it, I found 32 children's books with cracked spines, penciled names, and the faint basement smell of our old house. Several had property labels from the elementary school Marisol and I attended. We had apparently failed to return them in the 1980s. I called the school librarian, explained without giving her my divorce history, and offered to replace or return them. She laughed and said the school no longer used that accession system, I could keep them or donate them wherever they would be read. That answer relieved me more than it should have. The books were not evidence in Reed's application. They were not proof that I secretly wanted motherhood. They were objects from a childhood that had continued into an adult life with more than one legitimate shape. I kept 4, gave 6 to Marisol for her family, and donated the rest to a neighborhood family shelter through the library's normal process. I did not attach a note about betrayal. Children receiving books did not need to carry the lesson of my marriage. The shelter coordinator sent the same standard receipt she sent every donor. For once, institutional language felt proportionate: number of books, date received, no invented household and no role assigned to me beyond donor. I filed the receipt with my tax papers and forgot about it until the following spring. My relationship with Tessa's twins changed awkwardly at first. They were 14 and knew only that Uncle Reed and Aunt Dana had divorced. Tessa did not tell them they had awakened his desire to parent, and I was glad. I still attended one soccer game that fall because they invited me directly. Reed was there on the opposite sideline. We nodded and watched the same match. Nothing else needed to happen between us. Afterward, one twin asked whether she could still volunteer at my library branch for a school service project. I said yes. Divorce changed the route between us, not every relationship built along it. Reed did not use the twins to send messages, and Tessa honored my request not to report his dating life. At holidays, I accepted invitations that came directly to me and declined the ones that seemed designed to force a reunion. Some relatives treated that as inflexibility. Marisol reminded me that a boundary could disappoint people without becoming punishment. 9 months after I moved, Marisol persuaded me to have coffee with a divorced school counselor named Jonah. When he asked whether I had children, I said no. He asked, carefully, whether that had been a choice or a loss. In the first months after the caseworker's call, I would have heard judgment in the question. This time I told him the truth. Not becoming a parent had been a real choice, and I also grieved being denied the chance to revisit it honestly with my husband. Jonah did not turn the answer into a diagnosis or a promise. He said he had an adult daughter and was not looking to begin parenthood again. We met once more the following week and agreed we were better as acquaintances. The date mattered because the question had been spoken plainly and neither of us assigned the other an answer. I never learned whether Reed reapplied alone or with anyone else after the divorce. I did not ask Nia, Elise, or his family. If he eventually became a parent through an honest process, that future would not retroactively justify what he did to ours. If he never did, that would not make my refusal to lie responsible for his loss. Both possibilities could remain outside my life. The following winter, Marisol came over to help mount shelves in the workroom. She picked up one of the 4 books I had kept, a battered collection of animal stories with Dana written across the title page in purple marker. "You used to make me listen to this every night," she said. "You always skipped the sad one," I replied. "You cried." "So did you." We argued about that for several minutes, then sat on the floor and read the story to ourselves. Nothing in the room needed to symbolize a missing child. It held my sister, my work, and a history that belonged to me before Reed used it as scenery for another household. When the shelves were level, Marisol asked where I wanted the battered book. I chose the shelf beside the work table, not because it proved which life I should have lived, but because she had asked and the answer was mine to give.